Black perspectives haven't always been centered in the telling of America's story. Now, we're taking center stage. Introducing NPR's Black Stories, Black Truths, a collection of Black-led stories from NPR's podcasts. Search NPR Black Stories, Black Truths wherever you get your podcasts.
Support comes from Mercedes-Benz of Buckhead, where the power of electric meets the power of Mercedes. Introducing a lineup of electric vehicles, the EQB, the EQS sedan and SUV, the EQE sedan and SUV. The vehicles are all electric. The feeling is all Mercedes. Mercedesofbuckhead.com.
Welcome back for another edition of Political Breakfast. We are so pleased that we can come to you not once but twice a week, and we're even more pleased that you are here listening to us here on WABE. Earlier this week, of course, we were talking about the presidential race and how that is mounting and how age may or may not play a role in that race, among other things. Another race that people are beginning to chatter about is one involving our long-serving U.S. Representative David Scott, who now has a challenger. And a challenger, we've heard his name before, and that's Democrat Marcus Flowers. And Theron, let me begin with you. You're behind the scenes chatting with Democrats. What do you think about this? You know, we're hearing that people, Democrats in particular, are talking about his age and possibly his health. So maybe you can give us some insight there, Theron.
You know, one of his dear friends and a friend of mine and a big fan of this show, and I got to shout her out because I promised her a month ago I was going to do so, but Lindsey Strickland, who is the better half of Senator Brian Strickland in the state capitol, called me this week, Lisa, and really complimented me and Brian to say, look, you know, you guys definitely talked about the age of Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Brian wanted to talk about the issues. You know, you talked about the issues, and she really complimented us for remaining civil. So shout out to Lindsey, who loves this podcast. Brian, I don't know if you want to say something, but I don't want to feel the wrath of Lindsey Strickland, because she said she's been waiting on this shout out for a very, very long time.
Thank you, Lindsey.
So,
Thank you.
I'm going to be seeing her soon, too, because she bought Girl Scout cookies from Quinn. So I'll be delivering Girl Scout cookies to her probably this week.
Is it too late to order? I remember that email coming.
Yes.
Is it too late to order?
I may have some on hand for you.
Okay.
If you want to place an order a little bit.
All right, just like a Republican, always selling.
Always selling.
I remember the email, Brian. I forgot to respond. I'm so sorry. I am so sorry.
So let's get to what you asked me, Lisa. And here's what I'm hearing behind the scenes. First of all, let me just start with Congressman David Scott. Great alpha man. Brian knows was a outspoken state senator when he was in the legislature. Worked very closely with a lot of people in the 90s and ran for Congress and went on the Hill right around the time when Brian and I were on the Hill. And that District 13 was a sort of carved out, really weird district. But he won and has been serving the people of Georgia honorably ever since. B-Rob, remind me what year that was. Was that 04 or 02? Or
it was 02 was when that five-finger district that he first won came out, and then we redistricted, mid-decade, and he won the more compact 13th.
So, Lisa, we're talking about a 22-year congressional veteran, to your point earlier.
Absolutely.
Right? And, it's very equivalent, and I get a little choked up talking about it because I start thinking about my hero, the late, great Congressman Lewis, who had served a long time as well. And then also don't forget Sanford Bishops in Southwest Georgia. So what I'm hearing is that the district is different, the new district, because we went through a congressional redistricting, and a lot of focus was on District 6 and 7. But a lot of people were not talking about the new sort of district that David Scott represents and was going to run for. And to remind our listeners, in Georgia, you do not have to live physically in your congressional district to run for the district. So this is a congressman who has been battle tested. He had some very serious opposition less than 2 years ago when we ran in 2022, and he prevailed. And now here comes Marcus Flowers. And Lisa, I have been hearing a lot of chatter, in Atlanta, when I start getting calls from people saying, hey, what do you think about David Scott? Or, hey, you hear anybody running with David Scott? Did not know that they were probably referring to this gentleman, and they were sort of testing the waters. And my response was simple. David Scott is a great congressman. He's a dear friend. I respect him. I think he's doing a good job, and he would be very hard to beat. Yeah, and that's still my stance.
He is so beloved. Yeah, people. I don't think people know how much he is so beloved.
And his constituent services, the job fair that he does, and then he's a get it done congressman in Washington. He can work with Republicans to get things done. But here comes Marcus Flowers. This guy raised, $16 million in an unsuccessful race against Marjorie Taylor Greene. He's getting out here early. I'm also hearing that maybe a couple other people, at least maybe one more person from the local level that may be jumping this race. So, Lisa, we're talking about this primary could have anywhere between 3 to maybe 5 people running. We know we got 2 already with Marcus Flowers and David Scott. There's probably going to be another person. So the congressman, I think, had to be anticipating this, right? With the changing of the district, him being, sort of opposed in the past. I miss seeing him, flying up to D.C. We usually are on the D.C. flights together. And he listens to this podcast. Marcus Flowers is a serious challenger because he's running unsuccessfully for Congress. He's got some name recognition, and he can raise money. I got to look at a little bit more the makeup of the district, because I think the majority of the district knows who at least David Scott is, but there are certain portions of it that is be redrawn. And I think I've read something about like Rockdale County now is kind of majority in his new district, and that used to be represented by Hank Johnson. So money is going to play an important role. Name recognition, outreach, being able to get up on TV early on. And I think that the congressman, until I'm told differently, is ready for the challenge, is prepared. But Marcus is going to be serious. I don't know him personally. I know some folks that worked on this campaign. I'm hearing again there may be a couple other people who may be thinking about jumping in. So we're talking about a possible combative primary that will also probably have a runoff.
Brian, what are Republicans thinking about him? He mounted this campaign against Marjorie Taylor Greene and was able to raise millions, wasn't he, rather quickly?
It is an obscene amount for a congressional race.
For sure.
A total you just simply do not see for one of 435 seats. And what that reflects isn't that he is some kind of dynamo. I mean, credit to him for having a team competent enough to rake that much in. But when you're running against Marjorie Taylor Greene, all you got to do is cut the website on and put the donation button on there, and it begins to pour in. That's not going to be the case in a race against a Democratic incumbent, particularly one who is well respected in his state. What do Republicans think? They like David Scott, the ones who know him. I mean, it's hard to have a profile as a congressman anymore because we don't hear much from our delegation, nothing to do with David Scott. We don't hear much from any of them, really, other than Marjorie Taylor Greene. Everybody knows who she is. We don't really hear too much from the others. Doesn't mean they're not doing anything. It's just kind of a product of how the media landscape is these days. But David Scott, through the years, has been willing to buck his party and to go be a centrist. He was a blue dog Democrat back when that was a thing. That's kind of disappeared now. But yeah, he's somebody who's a pragmatist, in my opinion. I do think he's had some health issues. I don't know the extent of them, but I hear it consistently from those who see him that, and he is 78. That's to be expected. But there was a young, really whip-smart African-American Democrat who took him on a few years ago, Michael Owens. He's filled in for Theron on this show before, and he's now the mayor of Mableton. He's an IT security guy who went to Georgia Tech and then to maybe Caltech or something like that. He's a brilliant dude. And he got smoked by David Scott because David Scott's got a lot of political capital to burn there. And even though I don't think everybody knows who their congressman is anymore, I think there's less name ID for them than there was 30 years ago when we had media that covered the Washington delegation in the way they don't now. He's still got goodwill with his constituency, and it will be very difficult to take him out. And I think he will serve for as long as he wants to. But, Marcus also, he's a veteran. He's African-American, and he wears the cowboy boots and the cowboy hat, which is probably a pretty good profile for the 14th district running against Greene. Not so much the profile of the 13th district, which is urban on the south side of Atlanta and east side of Atlanta now. So he may need to do some rebranding for this race.
Well, he's quoted as saying he wants to defend our democracy against those that seek to do it harm. I mean, where is his messaging really going, and who's the audience? Who's the intended audience therein?
Yeah, and I just confirmed it. AJC did, when they broke the story, they said he raised upwards or more than $16 million. But to Brian, he makes a good point. Will he be able to raise that much money against an incumbent member of Congress who once chaired the very powerful and much needed Agriculture Committee? 2 years ago, Brian and I were talking about this when Dems were in charge, we were saying, hey, there's a lot of members in the Georgia delegation that had a lot of power. I mean, we always talked about Drew Ferguson being on the powerful Ways and Means, Hank Johnson being on transportation. But we always talked about how David Scott serving as the chair of the Agriculture Committee was so important to bring funding home from Georgia. And so you'll hear, I'm sure David Scott's campaign is going to talk a lot about that. So one, Mark is not going to be able to raise that much money against an incumbent congressman. I think the congressman will raise an enormous amount of money. It gets a little tricky, Lisa, to your point, because you're not going to be able to run the same race that you ran in the district with Marjorie Taylor Greene that you're going to run in this area. A lot of these voters, to Brian's point, are going to be introduced to these gentlemen and maybe these ladies for the first time. But that's where I think David Scott has the upper hand. Last thing I'll say is this. If Marcus can get the money that I think he may be able to get, then he's going to have to get known pretty quickly. Because before you can start telling people what's wrong with the congressman they have, you got to tell them more about what's right about you. And he's got to really spend some early money and get out there to try to really get known. And remember, I said this district is fairly new. So who will have the upper hand, we'll just have to wait and see. But I have not heard of anybody urging the congressman not to run. But if I hear that next time we talk about it, I'll share that information.
Sounds Like ATL is a music documentary series that takes an in-depth look at the artists amplifying Atlanta's famed music community. Built around a desire to highlight Atlanta's diverse and world-renowned music scene, each episode features unforgettable, intimate musical performances by fresh new musical guests, each with exclusive interviews about the stories behind their music. Listen to Sounds Like ATL Saturday evenings at 7 on WABE and WABE.org.
Hey y'all, I'm Mark Kendall.
And I'm David Perdue.
And we're the hosts of What's Good Atlanta, the new weekly comedy podcast from WABE.
On What's Good Atlanta, we run down uplifting and unusual headlines from the universe known as Atlanta.
And while we may not be journalists, we are comedians, and we'll be breaking down news and breaking down the stories that make you smile.
We're just trying to see what's good, Atlanta.
Episodes drop Fridays at WABE.org or wherever you get your podcasts. I get mine from a guy named Craig.
Shout out to Craig.
Mm-hmm.
WABE.
Flowers is saying in his messaging, defending our democracy against those that seek to do it harm. Who's his intended audience, and what is he doing? Is he trying to have this broad-based messaging, like you said, to reach this new district that's made up of all these little new components?
But he's echoing the messaging that we're hearing from the Biden administration, or the Biden campaign to some degree. But it's the wrong message in a Democratic primary. I'm not an expert on winning Democratic primaries by any means, but when you're running against an incumbent, you can't run on generalized messaging. You have to make an argument for firing them. You've got to make an argument to the voters for replacing the person that they have put in office for 22 years. And you've got to say they're doing something wrong. Generally, so what we see in the Democratic primary is you say, they're too moderate. We somebody who's a true Democrat, somebody who's more liberal. That's going to be a really hard case for Marcus Flowers to make, because he ran as a moderate against Marjorie Taylor Greene out of pragmatism, because you had to have that role in the 14th district. You couldn't run as a left winger and win there. So I think it's really difficult for someone who is run as a moderate to come into a Democratic primary where the voters are going to be to the left of the general election electorate, just as Republicans are to the right of a general election electorate, and make the argument that you need to trade out David Scott for somebody from West Georgia, which is, he's not even from the district. He maybe will move, but you've got to generally have an angle, and that messaging doesn't do the job. It doesn't give an argument for why voters need to replace David Scott, and it won't work. It may just be an opening volley. He may be having some whisper campaign about David Scott's health issues and capacity to do the job. I don't know. But, in today's age, these districts are too big for whisper campaigns. You've got to put big money behind your messaging in order for it to sink in with your primary electorate. And I'm not hearing anything in there that's going to move the needle and hurt David Scott.
Any word, Theron, on who else might be jumping in the race? I've heard Vincent Ford. Who else?
Yeah, State Senator Vincent Ford, I think, ran against him last time. And there were like 4 people in that race. We had been hearing for a long time that now City Council member Keisha Shawn Waits was thinking about running, but I think she's going to be running for another seat, Fulton County now. And, there's a lot of people looking at it. Now, as far as people telling me, I think they know where I stand with the congressman. Like, I'm going to be clear. I'm not, anybody's coming to me saying, hey, we want to hire you to run against David Scott. That's kind of like a non-starter. But look, the other thing that is going to come up in this race is Brian has talked about, again, I remind our listeners, Georgia law says you do not have to live in your congressional district in order to run. So the fact that he's living in West Georgia, or Congressman Scott lives in Emmett Park area, and he's been dealing with that for 22 years, right, Brian? I mean, that always comes up.
He's never lived in the district all those years. Yeah,
and I think his response to that is, look, I do a good job of serving the people. If this becomes a 3 to 4 to maybe 5 person race, Lisa, then that's where I think the money comes in. It's going to be so important. And who's going to have the best ground game? Because as Brian mentioned, Congress, and we're talking about a May primary. I mean, we're in February. So who can really get going quickly with the infrastructure, where David Scott has already got a built-in infrastructure and people who are battle tested who can work with him. So buckle up. This race is going to be very, I think, combative. I think it's going to make some national attention. I'll see CBC, Congressional Black Caucus members, probably start getting involved pretty quickly with Congressman Scott.
Thanks, guys, for another great edition. I'm glad we're doing this 2 times a week because there's a lot to talk about, right? So we'll do it again next week, but Theron won't be here because Theron will be celebrating his birthday. So we'll see you in 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, I would definitely just be taking a much-needed day off around the time that my birthday is happening. So just in case Saba and Brian wants to get out here talking about I don't work on my birthday, I will be working. But no, thank you. I'm looking forward to celebrating 46.
All right. All right. We'll see you when you're a year older and talk to you then. And I bet a lot will have happened in politics then. All right. Y'all have a great week and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Lisa.
Hey, it's Alex Sujong Laughlin and Kelsey McKinney
from the Normal Gossip Podcast.
We're so excited to announce that we're bringing our show live to a stage near you.
Normal Gossip is coming to Atlanta on March 8th at Symphony Hall, and we can't wait to see you there.
Join us for glow sticks, a real squirrel hat, secrets, and a great gossip story we can't stop telling.
Tickets are on sale now at normalgossiplive.com.